There is nothing you must do, nothing you must achieve. You can simply allow yourself to drift with the story. Tonight we are not in the noise of Rome's streets, nor in the clamor of its politics or its armies. We are stepping inside something gentler, softer, and far more intimate. We are entering a Roman garden. This is not the Rome of generals and emperors. This is the Rome of courtyards, flowers, fountains, and sacred trees. It is the Rome of leisure, of slow afternoons, of whispered prayers to household gods. A place of calm, a place of green. Close your eyes if you wish, and picture yourself in a villa, somewhere on the gentle hills outside the city. The air is quiet, touched only by the sounds of nature. The stone walls keep out the dust of the roads. A wooden door opens, and before you stretches a garden. Entering the courtyard, the path is made of small stones, arranged carefully. Your feet move slowly over them. On either side, trimmed boxwood edges rise no higher than your knees, soft and neat, marking the edges of the walkway. The Romans loved order in their gardens. They clipped hedges, shaped trees, and aligned pathways. To them, beauty meant harmony. Overhead, a pergola stretches its wooden beams, and grapevines curl lazily along it. Their leaves catch the late sunlight, casting patterned shadows on the path below. In autumn, these vines would be heavy with grapes, clusters of purple fruit sweetened by the sun. You walk further in, and the air begins to change. It is cooler, moister. Somewhere nearby, you hear water. Not the roar of a river, not the rush of a storm, but the gentle trickle of a fountain. The fountain's song. In the center of the courtyard is a round basin made of stone. In its middle rises a small figure, cast in bronze. A dolphin, arched and playful. From its open mouth flows a thin stream of water, falling into the basin with a soft, steady rhythm. Romans believed water brought freshness not only to the body, but also to the spirit. In their gardens they always sought it, whether in a fountain, a pool, or a tiny channel that carried water through the flowers. The sound is constant. It is not sharp. It is not loud. It is a murmur, a lullaby. If you lean close and touch the water, you feel it cool against your skin. You see your reflection ripple and break upon its surface. And behind your reflection, the branches of a fig tree sway gently, leaves flickering like green coins in the fading light.
Now you notice the flowers. The Romans planted carefully chosen ones, each with a meaning, each with a story. There are roses, full and fragrant, symbols of love and passion. Their petals spill open like layers of silk. There are lilies, tall and pale, standing upright like slender flames, their scent clean and sharp. And there are violets, hidden low to the ground, small and shy, their purple petals catching droplets of fountain mist. To bend down and notice the violets was considered almost an act of devotion. They symbolized humility, quietness, and the fleeting nature of joy. Romans admired not only the proud blooms, but also the modest ones. The kind that could be overlooked unless you slowed down. Here, in this garden, you have slowed down. You see the violets. You smell their sweetness. You carry their meaning within you. Sacred plants. But Roman gardens were not only about beauty. They were also about the sacred. Look toward the corner of the courtyard, where tall laurel trees rise, their leaves dark, smooth, and shining. Laurel was sacred to Apollo, god of prophecy, music, and healing. Wreaths of laurel crowned poets, athletes, and emperors. To pluck a leaf was to touch something divine. Beside the laurel stands an olive tree, its silvery leaves shimmering in the evening air. Olives were more than food. They were symbols of peace, of endurance, of sacred nourishment. The tree itself was hardy, surviving droughts, living for centuries. It whispered of continuity, of time flowing gently on. And near the villa's white wall, in terracotta pots, grows myrtle. This small-leaved plant was sacred to Venus, goddess of love and beauty. Its scent was subtle, but to Romans it softened the heart. It was planted at weddings, woven into garlands, offered to the goddess herself. In every Roman garden, beauty was tied to belief. The plants were not only pleasing to the eye, they carried meaning, memory, and devotion. Leisure in the garden. The garden was a place to rest, to escape the busyness of Roman life. Imagine a stone bench, placed beneath a fig tree. The leaves are broad and generous, casting a wide shade. On the bench lies a scroll, unrolled part way, a poem by Ovid, perhaps, or verses by Virgil. A Roman might sit here in the quiet evening, reading softly aloud to themselves. Or they might listen as a friend recited, the words rising like music into the warm night. Sometimes, small gatherings took place in gardens. Friends would talk, sipping watered wine, their voices blending with the song of cicadas. Children might chase one another along the paths, laughter bouncing off stone walls. But often, the garden was solitary. A place to think, to breathe, to wander slowly with no purpose at all. You sit now on the stone bench. The surface is cool against you. The air is filled with scents, fig, rose, myrtle. You close your eyes, and you feel time slowing. The household gods. In many Roman gardens, there were small shrines, tiny altars for the household gods, the Lares and Penates. These deities guarded the family, the home, and the food stores. They were simple, comforting figures, often carved in terracotta or bronze. Imagine one now, set against the wall, shaded by ivy. A small platform holds offerings. Perhaps a little bread, a cup of wine, a few scattered flowers. The flame of a tiny oil lamp flickers beside them, glowing faintly in the gathering dusk. The presence of these gods made the garden not only a place of beauty, but also a place of blessing. To sit here was to be watched over, cared for, protected. Evening descends. The sun sinks lower. Shadows lengthen. The garden changes. By day it was bright, fragrant, alive with birds and bees. Now, as night falls, it becomes softer, more mysterious. The fountain continues to murmur. The scent of flowers grows heavier in the cooler air. Lanterns are lit, small flames glowing behind bronze or clay screens, casting warm pools of light along the paths. Above, the sky turns from gold to purple, and then to deep blue. One by one, stars appear, faint at first, then stronger. You sit still. The garden holds you. Time drifts, and you drift with it. Closing of Part 1. Tonight you have entered a Roman garden. You have walked along its paths. You have touched the leaves of laurel and olive, smelled the roses and violets, listened to the fountain sung, and rested on a stone bench beneath a fig tree. This is only the beginning. The garden holds much more: herbs, altars, shaded walkways, rituals, stories of devotion, feasts, and quiet games. The kitchen garden, herbs and healing. Beyond the roses, violets, and fountains of beauty lies another part of the Roman hortus, quieter but no less important. This is the herb garden, the place where usefulness and devotion meet. Romans did not separate pleasure from practicality. The same garden that offered flowers for the soul also grew herbs for the body, for food, and for medicine. To walk into this corner of the villa is to enter a space filled with scents both sharp and soothing. Here grows rosemary, its needle-like leaves releasing a pine-like fragrance when brushed. It was burned in rituals of purification, scattered on coals to cleanse the air. In cooking, its leaves seasoned meats, while in medicine, it was thought to strengthen memory and the heart. Beside it grows sage, soft and gray-green, its name itself derived from salvus, meaning safe, or saved. It was believed to heal many illnesses, from coughs to wounds. Romans sipped sage teas, applied sage poultices, and honored it as a sacred herb tied to Jupiter. Closer to the wall is thyme, delicate, with tiny leaves. Thyme was connected to courage. Roman soldiers bathed in its scent, believing it would bring them bravery. In the garden, its fragrance was sharp, resinous, a reminder of vigor and strength. And in a shaded pot grows basil, though to the Romans it was not yet the sweet basil we know today, but a rougher cousin. They believed it had powers both protective and dangerous. Some thought it could ward off evil, others feared it could bring scorpions if planted carelessly. Every herb carried a story. Every leaf had meaning. To walk here was to wander through a living pharmacy, a sacred kitchen, and a temple of scent. The colonnade and the shade. From the herb garden, the path turns toward a shaded walkway. Along the villa's edge runs a colonnade, a row of columns supporting a roof that casts a long shadow. Here the Romans strolled during the hottest hours of the day, sheltered from the blazing sun. The columns are tall and wide, their bases surrounded by pots of ivy and climbing vines. Between the pillars, you glimpse the greenery of the garden beyond, framed like a series of living paintings. The floor beneath is paved in mosaic, tiny tiles arranged into patterns, waves, vines, and perhaps even small birds or fish. Each step echoes softly, a reminder that even in leisure, Romans carried elegance. Beneath this colonnade, benches are placed at intervals. Someone might recline here with a scroll, reading philosophy or poetry. Another might simply sit and gaze outward, watching the fountain sparkle in the distance. The shaded walk is not only practical, but also spiritual. It offers a rhythm for contemplation. Step by step, column by column, thought by thought. The body rests, the mind wanders, the soul drifts. Devotions among plants. Near the shaded walk, there are more shrines. Small niches cut into the villa's walls hold terracotta figurines of household gods, but here, too, larger statues stand. A marble figure of Venus, serene and graceful, rises above a bed of myrtle. A small altar lies before her, with a bowl for offerings. Perhaps petals of roses are scattered there, or drops of perfumed oil. Nearby, an image of Apollo, crowned with laurel, stands beside a cluster of bay trees. At his feet burns incense, sending upward thin threads of smoke. The Roman garden was not only leisure, it was worship. The gods were present in every leaf and every pool of water. To stroll among these paths was to walk through a place both earthly and divine. Small creatures of the garden. As the evening deepens, you notice the quiet company of creatures. The Romans welcomed them, for the garden was alive not only with plants but also with animals. A small bird perches upon the edge of the fountain, dipping its beak into the water. Its feathers tremble with each sip. Another flutters through the vines, vanishing into leaves. In the soil, beetles and ants move in their tiny rhythms. Cicadas hum, their song rising and falling like waves. Occasionally, a lizard darts across the path, its small body flashing in the lamplight. Romans often placed statues of animals in their gardens, birds, dogs, even serpents, blending art with life. These figures reminded them that the garden was part of nature's wider world, a microcosm of creation. The quiet meal. In the center of the courtyard, a low table has been set. Upon it rests a simple meal, olives, cheese, figs, and bread. A jug of watered wine stands nearby. This is not a feast, not a banquet. It is an intimate evening meal, taken in the peace of the garden. The family sits upon stools or reclines upon small couches. Conversation flows gently, mingled with the sound of water and the chirping of night insects. A child picks a violet and places it upon the table. A guest pours wine into cups, raising one gently toward the shrine before drinking. Laughter rises softly, never breaking the calm. To dine in the garden is to merge life's needs with beauty. The food nourishes, the setting soothes, the gods are honored, and the soul is refreshed. Night lanterns. As darkness settles fully, the garden glows with lanterns. Clay lamps burn oil, their small flames steady behind bronze screens. Some hang from hooks upon the walls. Others sit upon stone pedestals along the paths. The fountain reflects their light, each ripple catching a shimmer. The leaves gleam softly, silver and green. The air is cooler now, touched with night scents, jasmine, perhaps, or the deeper fragrance of myrtle. Above, the sky is filled with stars. The villa's walls protect you, but the heavens open beyond them. The Romans often looked upward from their gardens, finding in the stars another kind of beauty, another kind of mystery. Here, under the night, the garden does not sleep. It simply changes its voice, speaking more quietly, more intimately. And you remain, listening, watching, breathing. Rituals of the garden. The Roman garden was not merely a retreat for the senses, it was also a stage for rituals, for gestures of meaning woven into daily life. Every leaf could hold a prayer, every flower could carry devotion. In the quiet corner of the villa, a small altar stands beneath a vine-covered trellis. Upon it, fresh herbs are placed each morning. A few sprigs of rosemary, a handful of thyme, a scattering of violets. These are not extravagant offerings, but simple ones, the kind that connect the household to the divine. The paterfamilias, the head of the family, steps forward, carrying a small bowl of wine. With careful motion, he pours a libation onto the earth before the altar. The liquid darkens the soil, and the fragrance of wine mingles with the scent of crushed herbs. A short prayer is murmured to the livres, the guardians of the home, asking for peace and prosperity. Nearby, the matron of the household may weave garlands of myrtle or laurel, draping them around the shrine. Children watch, learning silently the gestures that have been passed down for generations. To the Romans, these acts were not heavy with solemnity. They were as natural as breathing, as expected as lighting a lamp in the evening. In every garden ritual, beauty and faith blended together. Symbolic offerings. Certain plants carried symbolic weight far beyond their practical use. The laurel, sacred to Apollo, was burned as incense in moments of thanksgiving. Its smoke rose lightly, said to carry prayers upward. The olive was never wasted. A branch, still bearing its silver leaves, might be laid upon an altar as a sign of peace. Even a small bowl of olive oil could be dedicated, its golden gleam a reflection of divine blessing. Myrtle was offered at weddings, placed upon shrines of Venus to ensure harmony and love within the family. And violets, humble, delicate violets, were laid upon graves, connecting gardens of the living with the quiet rest of the dead. Every offering was simple. A flower plucked, a branch broken, a leaf crushed. Yet each carried meaning deeper than gold or jewels. The garden itself provided what was needed for devotion. Philosophy among the leaves. Beyond ritual, the Roman garden was also a place for thought. Imagine a philosopher walking slowly beneath a colonnade, scroll in hand. He pauses to look at a fig tree, its branches spreading wide, heavy with fruit. He reflects on the cycles of growth, the fruit ripening, the leaves falling, the tree resting, and then rebirth again in spring. The garden becomes a living text, every plant a metaphor. The rose blooms and fades, teaching the brevity of beauty. The olive endures storms, teaching resilience. The laurel crowns the victorious, teaching the reward of patience. To sit beneath a vine and read the words of Cicero or Seneca was not only to study philosophy, but to live it. The garden itself was a companion in thought, a silent teacher whispering lessons through its seasons. Festivals in the garden. The year in Rome was marked by festivals, and many touched the garden. During the festival of Floralia, honoring Flora, goddess of flowers, the garden bloomed with special life. Garlands of blossoms were hung across walls and gates. Flowers were scattered along the paths, and laughter filled the air. At Saturnalia, when roles were reversed and joy overflowed, families decorated their homes and gardens with greenery, ivy, laurel, and pine. The garden became a place of merriment, of songs, of feasts shared in the open air. Even small, private celebrations, birthdays, anniversaries, victories, were often marked in the garden. A wreath was hung, a libation poured, a table set among the roses. The garden was not only a quiet sanctuary, at times it was also the heart of festivity, glowing with light, filled with voices. The garden at dawn. Not all moments are evening. Picture instead the garden at dawn. The sky is pale, the air cool, the paths still damp with dew. Birds begin their songs, filling the silence with gentle notes. The fountain flows quietly, its sound mingling with the waking world. Servants move softly, watering plants, sweeping paths, trimming hedges. The family may still be asleep, but the garden is already alive. Herbs release their fragrance as they are touched. Blossoms open slowly, turning toward the rising sun. In these early hours, the garden feels pure, untouched, as if it belongs to nature alone. To walk here in the dawn is to feel reborn, renewed, ready for the day ahead. Children in the hortus. In the softer corners of the garden, children play. They chase butterflies, they float petals upon the fountain's water, they weave simple crowns from daisies and violets. Their laughter echoes beneath the pergola, but even in play, they learn. A child plucking sage is told of its healing power. A child touching laurel hears the story of Apollo. A child weaving roses is told of Venus. The garden is their first classroom, and its lessons are gentle. It teaches them patience as seeds grow, reverence as offerings are placed, joy as blossoms appear. For Romans, the garden raised not only plants, but also people. Evening reflections. As the day slows again toward evening, the family returns to the garden. The colonnade offers cool shadows, the fountain continues its lullaby. Perhaps a guest recites poetry, his voice low, words rising into the twilight. Perhaps another plucks the strings of a small lyre, its sound soft and fragile. The air carries fragrance, of herbs, of roses, of figs ripening on branches. The garden gathers all of it, ritual, philosophy, children's laughter, music, devotion, holding it in harmony. It is leisure. It is beauty. It is sacredness woven into daily life. The hands that shaped the garden. Every Roman garden, no matter how serene it appeared, required constant care. Behind the elegance of clipped hedges and flowering vines were the steady hands of gardeners, often enslaved workers or hired caretakers, who shaped the beauty each day. At dawn, one could hear the faint scrape of iron shears against boxwood, trimming the hedges into perfect order. The gardener knelt, gathering stray leaves, wiping sweat from his brow as the sun began to rise. Another worker hauled clay jars of water from the cistern, carrying them carefully to thirsty roots. A third tended the soil itself, loosening it with a wooden hoe, ensuring that herbs could breathe and blossoms could flourish. Each motion was humble, but without them, the harmony of the garden could not exist. These caretakers knew the plants intimately. They knew which vines demanded shade, which flowers preferred full light, which herbs must never be overwatered. Their knowledge was practical, but also sacred, passed down quietly from one hand to another. The beauty of the garden, enjoyed by the villa's family, rested upon these unseen labors. And though the Romans rarely named them in their writings, the gardener's touch is present in every leaf that sways gently in the evening air. Imported wonders. Romans loved their native plants, laurel, myrtle, fig, olive, but they also longed for the exotic. Through trade, conquest, and travel, rare plants were brought into the empire, carried across seas and roads, and planted in villa gardens as treasures. Imagine a guest walking into the courtyard and seeing a pomegranate tree, its red blossoms blazing like flames. This, the host might say, came from the east. Or perhaps a citron tree, with its thick-skinned golden fruit, placed proudly in a terracotta pot. These plants were not only admired for their beauty but also for what they represented: Rome's reach, Rome's wealth, Rome's connection to distant lands. Some villas even nurtured delicate roses said to have come from Greece, or spices like saffron grown in small plots. Others cultivated strange bulbs, curious roots, or flowers whose names were whispered as luxuries. For the Romans, a rare plant was as much a jewel as gold or silver. It carried the scent of travel, of discovery, of faraway places folded into the quiet of a garden. The changing seasons. Though Rome's climate was mild, the garden still moved with the seasons, each bringing its own voice. In spring, blossoms exploded, violets spread beneath the hedges, roses opened with abundance, fruit trees filled with fragrant flowers. The garden became a place of renewal, every corner alive with birds and bees. In summer, shade was prized. The pergolas, vines, and colonnades offered shelter from heat. Fountains ran constantly, cooling the air, while evenings stretched long with music and conversation. Herbs grew thick, ready for harvest, their fragrances sharp and full. In autumn, fruit ripened, grapes hung heavy from the vines, figs swelled, olives turned dark upon their branches. Families gathered the bounty, pressing oil, storing wine, feasting beneath the trees. The garden became a place of gratitude, of plenty. And in winter, though flowers retreated, the garden did not die. Evergreen boxwoods held their form, laurel trees stood proud, pine branches whispered. Lanterns glowed in the colder nights, and the shrines of the gods still received their offerings. Even in rest, the garden lived. To walk the Hortus across its seasons was to walk through the rhythm of time itself: birth, growth, harvest, rest, repeating endlessly, teaching patience, endurance, and renewal. Hidden meanings of trees. Every tree in the Roman garden carried more than shade, it carried a story. The fig was abundance. Its broad leaves sheltered benches, its fruit fed the household. Romans connected it with fertility, with the founding of Rome itself, recalling the fig tree near which Romulus and Remus were suckled by the she-wolf. The pine was longevity. Tall, straight, and evergreen, it whispered of immortality, of strength that endured through storms. Its resinous scent filled the air when branches were cut, reminding Romans of its cleansing power. The cypress was mourning. Dark, tall, and solemn, it was planted near tombs and along pathways of memory. In the garden, its presence was dignified, a reminder of life's fragility and the honor of remembrance. The pomegranate was life and death together, its fruit bursting with seeds, symbols of fertility and renewal, but also tied to Persephone and the underworld. To eat it was to taste both sweetness and mystery. Every tree was more than wood and leaf. It was a living story, a sacred text in green. The villa's view. From inside the villa, the garden was never far away. The atrium, the main hall, often opened toward the Hortus, framing it as a constant view. Through wide doorways and windows, the family could see the fountain glimmering, the vines twisting, the flowers shifting in the wind. This view was deliberate. The garden was not hidden, it was displayed, woven into daily life. Even as meals were prepared, business conducted, or guests welcomed, the presence of the garden was always felt. It was art, framed by architecture. From upper balconies, one could look down upon the garden as if it were a painting come to life, the paths forming patterns, the hedges in lines, the fountain a circle of calm. The Romans built their homes not only to shelter the body but also to soothe the eyes and the spirit. In every breath of villa life, the garden was present. It was not outside, it was within, part of the household itself. The silent hours. When the villa slept, the garden did not vanish. Beneath the stars, its forms stood still, fountains murmuring, leaves whispering, lamps flickering faintly. A dog padded softly along the colonnade, pausing to drink from the basin. A servant passed quietly with a lantern, checking the oil in the lamps. The air cooled, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. The garden's silence was not emptiness. It was fullness without words, a presence beyond sound. To sit here at midnight, when all else was still, was to feel the pulse of the earth itself, timeless, slow, and endlessly the garden a status. In Rome, gardens were more than private sanctuaries. They were also symbols. To own a beautiful hortus was to display wealth, taste, and connection to culture. When a guest entered a villa, the garden was often one of the first sights. The fountain's gentle sound, the clipped hedges, the ordered pathways, all spoke silently of refinement. Each rare plant suggested travel, trade, or influence. Each statue suggested education, memory of myths, and appreciation of art. The garden said, "This household is not only prosperous but also wise. It values harmony. It honors the gods. It delights in leisure." Some senators and nobles competed in their gardens, importing exotic plants, commissioning fountains, arranging terraces upon hillsides. A garden could be a quiet boast, a statement of status made not in words but in green leaves and running water. Banquets among blossoms. Though many meals were taken inside, special occasions called for dining in the garden. Imagine a long table set beneath a pergola of vines, the clusters of grapes hanging overhead. Cushions and couches are arranged, lamps are lit, and the air carries the mingling scents of roses and roasted meats. Guests recline, sipping wine diluted with water, listening to the soft plucking of a lyre. Servants bring dishes of olives, fresh bread, figs, and honey cakes. The fountain sings behind the voices, its rhythm constant. This is not the rowdy feast of a tavern, but the cultivated banquet of a villa. Conversation is gentle, laughter low, the mood one of ease. Poetry may be recited between courses, myths retold, or philosophical thoughts exchanged. The garden makes the banquet not only a meal but an experience, senses filled with fragrance, sight, sound, and taste in harmony. Sculptures among green. Along the paths, statues stand silent. Marble figures of gods, heroes, and nymphs appear among the leaves, half hidden by ivy, half revealed by lantern light. Here is a statue of Pan, the rustic god, pipes in hand, set near the herb garden. There stands Venus, serene and graceful, by the bed of roses. Apollo rises among the laurel, a lyre upon his shoulder. These figures bring mythology into daily life. They make the garden not only a place of plants but also a stage of stories. Children pause to ask, "Who is this?" And the tale is told, Pan's wild music, Venus's beauty, Apollo sung. Even animals are carved, stone dogs crouching by pathways, bronze birds perched upon pedestals. In the stillness of the night, the line between living creatures and statues blurs. The garden becomes a place where myth breathes, where art and nature speak together. Painted walls. Not all beauty lies in plants and statues. The villa walls themselves are painted with scenes. Step into the peristyle, where columns surround an inner courtyard. Between the pillars, frescoes cover the walls, images of gardens painted within a garden. Birds perch on painted branches. Flowers bloom upon the plaster. Fountains spill water that is only color, yet seems alive. For Romans, these painted gardens extended space. Even in winter, even when blossoms were gone, the walls bloomed eternally. They were windows into an imagined world, blending illusion with reality. To dine beside such frescoes, with a real fountain murmuring nearby, was to live in layers of beauty, art upon nature, nature upon art. Sound and scent. Close your eyes, and notice what fills the senses. The sound is never silence. The fountain's trickle, the hum of cicadas, the call of birds, the whisper of wind through leaves, all combine into a gentle symphony. Each note is soft, but together they fill the air with life. The scent is a tapestry. Roses spill sweetness, violets carry delicate perfume, myrtle breathes subtle love, rosemary and sage release sharp freshness, fig leaves smell green and full. In the evening, lamps add faint smoke, mingling with flowers. To walk the garden is to be bathed in layers of fragrance and sound. The Romans designed it so, understanding that peace comes not only through sight but through all the senses together. A living harmony. The garden is balance, of usefulness and beauty, of devotion and leisure, of art and nature. It is a mirror of the Roman idea of order. Every path, every plant, every statue is placed with care, arranged to form a whole greater than its parts. When you pause by the fountain, when you step beneath the pergola, when you look upon the laurel tree crowned with meaning, you are entering not only a physical space but also a philosophy of life. For the Romans, the hortus was the quiet heart of the villa. It taught them patience, devotion, gratitude, and the sweetness of rest. And as evening deepens, the harmony only grows stronger, the lanterns glowing softly, the stars rising overhead, the fountain never ceasing its song. Festivals in full bloom. The Roman calendar was dotted with festivals, and many of them touched the life of the garden. Here, sacred plants and joyous rituals merged into one. During Floralia, held each spring in honor of Flora, goddess of flowers, the garden came alive with color. Families decorated their gates with garlands, covered statues in blossoms, and scattered petals across pathways. Even servants and children wore crowns of flowers, laughter carrying through the villa. The garden became not only a place of leisure but a stage of celebration, the air thick with fragrance and song. At Saturnalia, when joy and reversal ruled, greenery filled every corner. Ivy twined around columns, pine branches adorned shrines, laurel-crowned doorways. Feasts spilled into the garden, and even in winter's chill, the space glowed with warmth and merriment. Lamps burned bright, wine flowed freely, and the sound of dice rattling on the garden tables mingled with music. Smaller family festivals, birthdays, victories, dedications, were often marked here too. A wreath placed upon a statue, a libation poured at the fountain, a quiet toast beneath the vines. The hortus was not only silent contemplation, it was also joy, woven into the rhythms of time. Daily care of flowers. Festivals were grand, but the daily rhythm of tending plants was no less important. Each morning, caretakers moved through the garden with baskets and tools. Wilted petals were gently removed, new shoots were tied to trellises, herbs were gathered for the kitchen. Roses required constant pruning, violets demanded careful watering, and lilies needed their stems supported so that they stood tall and proud. Terracotta pots were shifted according to the season, brought into sun or shade as needed. Soil was refreshed with ash or compost, water jars lifted to thirsty roots. The gardener's hands, stained with earth, kept the garden in its eternal youth. Even children sometimes helped, watering violets with small clay cups, or placing cut herbs into bowls for supper. In these small acts, they learned responsibility and reverence. Thus the garden remained alive, not only through festivals but through countless humble gestures, repeated day after day. Myths whispered in green. Every corner of the garden told a myth. By the laurel tree, stories of Apollo were retold, the god who pursued the nymph Daphne, who became the very tree to escape him. The leaves themselves seemed to carry that memory, rustling with whispers of the tale. By the myrtle, children heard of Venus, who cherished the plant as her own. To weave its leaves into garlands was to honor love itself. By the fig tree, elders recounted the legend of Romulus and Remus, nurtured beneath a fig near the river Tiber. The fruit of the fig thus tasted not only of sweetness but of Rome's very origins. Even the olive carried divine memory. It was said Athena gifted it to mankind in Greece, and Rome adopted it as its own symbol of endurance and peace. The myths gave depth to every plant. They transformed ordinary trees and herbs into living characters of divine drama. To walk among them was to walk inside stories. Private meditations. Not every moment in the garden was festive or communal. Some were quiet, solitary. Imagine a Roman senator, weary from politics, stepping into the hortus at twilight. He walks slowly along the colonnade, scroll tucked beneath his arm, eyes drifting not to words but to the fountain's surface. He sees the rippling reflection, distorted, fleeting, and he thinks of time. Or picture a matron, carrying a small lamp, sitting beside the olive tree. She crushes a sprig of sage between her fingers, inhales its sharp fragrance, and feels her spirit steadied. She offers a brief prayer, then simply sits in silence, her thoughts moving with the wind. The garden was not only for display, not only for guests, not only for ritual. It was for the self, for moments when a soul needed stillness. Its benches, its shade, its blossoms offered companionship when no words were wanted. The garden at nightfall. As dusk returns, the familiar transformation begins. The cicadas soften, the fountain continues its rhythm, lanterns glow along the paths. A breeze moves the vines, carrying the scent of myrtle and the faint sweetness of figs. Statues seem almost alive in the shifting shadows, their marble faces lit by flickering flames. The painted walls catch the lantern glow, their colors deepening, birds and blossoms upon plaster appearing to breathe. The household gathers one last time in the colonnade. Wine is poured, bread broken, a few final stories exchanged. Then, one by one, the voices fade, the guests drift away, the family retires. And the garden remains, eternal, watching, breathing, whispering. A sanctuary in stone and leaf, waiting for dawn to come again. Medicinal wisdom in the garden. Roman gardens were not only for beauty and leisure, they were also living pharmacies. Within the neat beds of herbs lay centuries of knowledge, practical and sacred, passed down through families and healers. Here grew valerian, its roots used to calm restlessness, to ease the troubled mind. Women prepared small infusions of it, offering comfort to the sleepless. Nearby was fennel, tall and feathery, carrying seeds with power. Romans believed fennel sharpened sight and strengthened courage. Warriors sometimes chewed its stalks before battle, while cooks dropped its seeds into stews for both flavor and protection. Chamomile spread low to the ground, its daisy-like blossoms gathered and steeped to ease fevers. Even its scent was soothing, drifting through the garden like a quiet promise of healing. And among the more mysterious herbs was rue, a plant both protective and dangerous. Romans believed it warded off evil, kept serpents away, and purified households. Yet too much of it could harm, a reminder that healing and danger often grew from the same soil. Each herb was respected. Each leaf was both remedy and ritual. To tend the garden was to tend the health of the family. Perfumes of the Hortus. Fragrance played a sacred role in Roman life. The garden was their perfumer's workshop. Roses were gathered at dawn, their petals crushed into oils. Violets were steeped, their sweetness captured in water. Myrrh and frankincense, imported at great cost, were blended with local herbs, creating perfumes for both temples and personal adornment. Perfume was more than luxury. It was offering. To anoint a statue of Venus with rose oil, to scatter myrtle leaves in a bath, to burn rosemary upon coals, these were acts of devotion, acts of life lived with beauty. As evening fell, the garden itself became a perfume, carrying layers of fragrance upon the air. Every breath was ritual, every inhalation a reminder of the gods. Sacred groves beyond the via. Though the villa's garden was private, Romans also revered larger, wilder sacred spaces. On the edge of cities and towns, groves of oak or cypress were set apart as holy ground. No one cut the trees, no one disturbed the silence. Within, altars stood, offerings were left, and the air carried a hush unlike any other. The villa garden echoed these groves in miniature. Its laurel trees, its altars, its careful silence, all imitated the greater sanctity of Rome's sacred woods. To walk in the Hortus was to feel a reflection of those ancient groves, a personal piece of the divine within one's own walls. The symbolism of colors. Romans did not view their gardens only as green. To them, colors spoke. The red of roses was passion and devotion, both to love and to the gods. It burned in garlands at feasts and in offerings at temples. The white of lilies was purity, clarity, a mark of sacredness. They were carried in rituals, offered in weddings, their whiteness a sign of blessing. The purple of violets was humility yet depth. Its richness spoke softly, hidden, but always present, a reminder that greatness often rests in modest things. The green of laurel and olive was victory and peace. Eternal, unfading, always strong. Thus a garden was not only fragrance and sound, but also a painted palette of meanings. Each color told a story, each blossom a word in a silent language. Philosophical walks. At times, the garden became a place of philosophy. A Roman thinker might stroll slowly beneath a pergola, reflecting on the brevity of roses, the endurance of olive, the solemnity of cypress. Nature became text, each plant a metaphor, each season a lesson. See, he might whisper, touching a fading blossom, all beauty passes, yet beauty returns. Or, laying a hand upon the trunk of an olive, he might say, endurance is victory. To live long and steady is the truest triumph. The garden taught philosophy not in words but in presence. To live among its paths was to live within wisdom itself. The deep stillness. Night again settles upon the Hortus. The lamps glow, the water trickles, the leaves shift softly. A servant walks once more along the paths, trimming a wick, adjusting a jar, ensuring that peace is preserved. Beyond the walls, the world of Rome may roar, streets filled with noise, politics, ambition, conflict. But here, stillness holds. The garden breathes, timeless and unshaken. To linger here at night is to feel that stillness seep into the soul. One becomes part of the rhythm, the fountain's murmur, the rustle of ivy, the silence of statues. This stillness is not emptiness. It is fullness, quiet and eternal. The garden is a teacher. For Romans, the garden was more than ornament, more than leisure, it was a teacher of life itself. Children learned patience by planting seeds and waiting for them to sprout. They learned reverence by placing flowers on household shrines. They learned joy by chasing butterflies, and humility by watching blossoms fade. The matron of the house might teach her daughter to weave garlands of violets, explaining their place in rituals. A father might point to the olive tree and speak of endurance, or to the laurel and speak of victory. Even servants, though bound to labor, found lessons in the soil, how balance, order, and care bring beauty to life. The hortus was an open book, each plant a line of wisdom written in green. The garden is memory. The garden also held memory. Families planted trees to mark births, marriages, and victories. A laurel might be planted for a son who achieved honor, an olive for peace after hardship, a fig for prosperity. These trees stood year after year, carrying stories silently in their branches. Flowers, too, were planted in memory of loved ones. Violets for the gentle, roses for the passionate, lilies for the pure. To sit beneath them was to sit among the presence of ancestors, to feel continuity flowing from root to root. Thus the garden was not only present beauty but also past and future, holding memory and promise in its soil. The garden and the senses. All 5 senses were awakened here. Sight, the mosaic of colors, roses red, lilies white, ivy green, fountains shimmering silver. Smell, herbs crushed beneath steps, blossoms perfuming the air, lamps adding faint smoke. Sound, water trickling, birds singing, cicadas humming, leaves rustling. Touch, smooth marble benches, cool stone pathways, rough bark, soft petals. Taste, figs plucked from branches, olives gathered from trees, herbs cut for the kitchen. The hortus was not abstract beauty, it was fully alive, engaging every part of the human body and soul. It was designed to be lived in, not only seen. Garden paintings and villas. Beyond the living garden, Romans created painted ones. Frescoes along villa walls often showed imagined landscapes, lush trees, exotic birds, distant temples. These were not decorations only, but expansions of space. A guest reclining indoors might feel as though he were still outside, surrounded by greenery. The illusion blended with reality, reminding all who entered that life was meant to be in harmony with nature. These painted gardens often included plants not found locally, suggesting idealized visions of paradise. They were dreams upon plaster, gardens eternal, gardens untouched by weather or time. The garden a sanctuary. Amid Rome's busy world, crowded streets, markets, courts, and politics, the garden was sanctuary. Here, ambition rested. Here, voices softened. Here, the heart slowed. A senator weary of debate might walk among violets. A matron burdened with household tasks might pause at the fountain. A soldier returning from campaign might sit beneath the olive, laying down his arms. The garden accepted all, soothed all, held all. It was a space where human effort met divine calm, where the earth itself seemed to say, rest. Eternal cycles. Above all, the garden taught cycles. Blossoms bloomed, withered, and returned. Fruit ripened, fell, and grew again. Leaves fell, and new ones came. This rhythm was not failure, but renewal. To see a rose fade was not sadness but assurance, another would come. To taste a fig in autumn was to know that next year's harvest was already forming. The garden spoke quietly, always repeating, nothing ends, all returns, life flows in endless circles. Evening's embrace. As another day closes, the villa's garden settles into its evening embrace. The fountain glimmers, the lamps glow, shadows stretch along mosaic paths. The marble faces of statues soften in the dim light, and the air grows heavy with night fragrance. The family gathers once more, wine is poured, a lyre plucked softly. Conversation drifts slowly, then fades. One by one, lamps are dimmed. And again, the hortus remains. Eternal, steady, patient, keeper of beauty, of memory, of peace. The gardens of the elite. Among Rome's wealthiest, the garden was no simple retreat. It was an empire in miniature. Senators, generals, and emperors themselves built vast villas with sprawling grounds. Pathways stretched wide, fountains rose high, and rare plants filled every corner. Some gardens even had artificial lakes, where swans glided across still water, their reflections shimmering in the torchlight. These elite gardens were stages of power. Guests strolling through them saw more than beauty, they saw influence, wealth, and reach. A single citron tree or a rare spice plant spoke volumes. This household touched lands far beyond Rome. At times, these gardens echoed the grandeur of temples, with colonnades, shrines, and statues so numerous that the space felt like a sacred grove transported into stone courtyards. Humble gardens of the common. Yet not all Romans lived among marble fountains. In humbler homes, the garden was smaller, simpler, but no less meaningful. A modest courtyard might hold a few pots of herbs, basil, thyme, rosemary, used daily for cooking and healing. A fig tree, if space allowed, gave shade and fruit. Perhaps a small fountain, little more than a basin, offered water and a touch of calm. Even in these simple spaces, blossoms might be grown for devotion. Violets in a corner pot, myrtle for love, laurel for honor. Children played, families gathered, prayers were whispered. Though less grand, these gardens carried the same spirit, harmony of nature, devotion, and peace within the walls of the home. Public and private spaces. Rome also boasted public gardens, open to citizens. Some were attached to temples, others gifted by wealthy patrons for the city's people. In these spaces, one could stroll among trees, sit by fountains, and feel the coolness of shade even without owning a villa. Public gardens became places of gathering, conversation, and quiet refuge from the bustle of markets and forums. Private and public both reflected the Roman love for cultivated nature. One intimate, personal, rooted in family, the other shared, civic, part of the city's collective soul. Exotic creatures. Some wealthy Romans went further, filling their gardens not only with exotic plants but with animals. Peacocks strutted across the paths, their feathers shimmering like painted fans. Doves cooed from rooftops, their wings flashing in sunlight. Small deer sometimes roamed enclosed groves, their delicate forms moving between statues and hedges. Even more exotic animals, brought from conquered lands, might appear as living marvels. A monkey chained near a tree, birds from Africa or the East in gilded cages, their calls strange and thrilling. To see such creatures was to be reminded of Rome's reach across the world. The garden became a theater of empire, every leaf and feather a symbol of conquest. Deeper sacred rituals. While daily offerings were simple, certain festivals or private devotions involved greater ritual. At times, priests were invited into villa gardens to bless them, scattering grains, pouring wine, and chanting prayers to protect the household. Laurel and olive branches were burned upon altars, filling the air with sacred smoke. In some villas, sacrifices of small animals, doves or lambs, took place in the garden shrines. Blood was offered to the gods, the soil itself receiving the sacred gift. Afterwards, garlands of flowers adorned the altars, restoring beauty where sacrifice had passed. The garden was thus not only leisure but also sacred theater, a place where divine and human worlds met directly. The garden at midday. Beyond rituals and grandeur, there were the quiet hours of daily life. At midday, when the sun burned strong, the colonnades gave cool relief. Shadows stretched long across the mosaic floors. The fountain spray glittered in the brightness, droplets cooling the air. Children napped in shaded corners, servants moved softly with jugs of water, and the matron of the house sat weaving garlands of ivy. Even the birds seemed still, their songs quieted in the heavy heat. In this hush, the garden seemed half asleep, waiting for evening's cool breath. Yet even then, it whispered calm, offering shade, fragrance, and timeless presence. Eternal companionship. For Romans, the garden was more than a space. It was a companion. It marked their festivals, witnessed their prayers, fed their tables, and soothed their griefs. A child might grow from infancy to youth beneath the same fig tree. A senator might return from campaign and rest by the same fountain he left years before. A matron might weave wreaths from the same myrtle year after year, her hands moving as naturally as the vines themselves. The garden endured while generations passed. It was a silent witness, steady, timeless, breathing alongside human lives. The language of water. In every Roman garden, water was more than necessity, it was poetry. The fountain's trickle was not only cooling sound, but a voice of eternity, a reminder of rivers, seas, and the flow of time itself. A small jet of water spilling from a lion's mouth, a gentle basin holding fish, a stone channel guiding streams through mosaic patterns, each carried meaning. For Romans, water was life. To see it in the garden was to see fortune and abundance. It symbolized prosperity, purity, and renewal. In dry lands, its presence was miracle, in villas, its constant murmur was luxury. The fountain spoke endlessly, day and night. It sang to children at play, it whispered to philosophers in thought, it lulled weary souls into rest. The craft of fountains. Roman engineers brought mastery even into gardens. Bronze spouts shaped as animals, stone basins carved with leaves, hidden pipes that brought water from cisterns or aqueducts, all revealed the union of skill and art. Some fountains were simple bowls, filled with lilies, reflecting lantern light. Others were grand, with multiple tiers, water cascading like silver threads into shaded pools. Guests entering a villa often saw a fountain first, placed deliberately in the center of the courtyard, glimmering in sunlight. Its presence announced refinement, wealth, and harmony. The garden without a fountain was incomplete. With it, the space breathed, the still air made alive. Terraces over the sea. Along the coasts, some villas were built upon cliffs, where gardens stretched as terraces descending toward the sea. Imagine walking down a marble stairway lined with ivy, hearing not only the fountain's murmur but also the waves crashing below. Here, vines clung to pergolas, roses bloomed beside stone balustrades, and olive trees twisted in salty wind. Guests reclining upon shaded couches could sip wine while watching ships sail upon the horizon. Such gardens joined land and water, villa and sea, human and nature. They were stages of peace, places where the grandeur of empire met the vastness of the eternal ocean. Poets in the garden. The Roman garden inspired not only leisure but verse. Poets carried their wax tablets and styluses, sitting upon benches shaded by fig or laurel. They wrote of roses and their fleeting beauty, of violets humble yet enduring, of fountains that mirrored stars at night. They compared lovers to blossoms, time to flowing water, virtue to the olive tree's steady endurance. The garden was both subject and setting. To write here was to merge thought with fragrance, words with leaves. Many of Rome's quietest verses were likely born beneath vines heavy with grapes, in courtyards alive with cicadas. Feasts with music. Evening often turned the garden into a stage of gentle festivity. Long couches were spread beneath pergolas, tables set with bronze lamps, dishes of figs, olives, cheese, and honey laid out. A lyre's strings were plucked softly, perhaps a flute joining in, the music mingling with the fountain's sound. Guests reclined, speaking slowly, savoring not only food but the sweetness of air and fragrance. Lamps flickered upon marble statues, casting shadows that seemed alive. Laurel garlands were worn, wine diluted with water poured carefully. It was not indulgence alone, but refinement, feasting within beauty, dining as philosophy. The garden in twilight. As twilight deepened, the last birds returned to nests, the cicada softened, and the stars emerged above the colonnade. The fountain glimmered faintly in the lantern glow. Perfumes thickened, the sharpness of rosemary, the sweetness of roses, the deep greenness of myrtle. Conversation slowed, music drifted into silence. Guests gazed upward at the constellations, the garden framing the heavens themselves. To end a day in the Hortus was to end in harmony, nature, art, devotion, and leisure woven into one gentle embrace. The language of water. In every Roman garden, water was more than necessity, it was poetry. The fountain's trickle was not only cooling sound, but a voice of eternity, a reminder of rivers, seas, and the flow of time itself. A small jet of water spilling from a lion's mouth, a gentle basin holding fish, a stone channel guiding streams through mosaic patterns, each carried meaning. For Romans, water was life. To see it in the garden was to see fortune and abundance. It symbolized prosperity, purity, and renewal. In dry lands, its presence was miracle, in villas, its constant murmur was luxury. The fountain spoke endlessly, day and night. It sang to children at play, it whispered to philosophers in thought, it lulled weary souls into rest. The craft of fountains. Roman engineers brought mastery even into gardens. Bronze spouts shaped as animals, stone basins carved with leaves, hidden pipes that brought water from cisterns or aqueducts, all revealed the union of skill and art. Some fountains were simple bowls, filled with lilies, reflecting lantern light. Others were grand, with multiple tiers, water cascading like silver threads into shaded pools. Guests entering a villa often saw a fountain first, placed deliberately in the center of the courtyard, glimmering in sunlight. Its presence announced refinement, wealth, and harmony. The garden without a fountain was incomplete. With it, the space breathed, the still air made alive. Terraces over the sea. Along the coasts, some villas were built upon cliffs, where gardens stretched as terraces descending toward the sea. Imagine walking down a marble stairway lined with ivy, hearing not only the fountain's murmur but also the waves crashing below. Here, vines clung to pergolas, roses bloomed beside stone balustrades, and olive trees twisted in salty wind. Guests reclining upon shaded couches could sip wine while watching ships sail upon the horizon. Such gardens joined land and water, villa and sea, human and nature. They were stages of peace, places where the grandeur of empire met the vastness of the eternal ocean. Poets in the garden. The Roman garden inspired not only leisure but verse. Poets carried their wax tablets and styluses, sitting upon benches shaded by fig or laurel. They wrote of roses and their fleeting beauty, of violets humble yet enduring, of fountains that mirrored stars at night. They compared lovers to blossoms, time to flowing water, virtue to the olive tree's steady endurance. The garden was both subject and setting. To write here was to merge thought with fragrance, words with leaves. Many of Rome's quietest verses were likely born beneath vines heavy with grapes, in courtyards alive with cicadas. Feasts with music. Evening often turned the garden into a stage of gentle festivity. Long couches were spread beneath pergolas, tables set with bronze lamps, dishes of figs, olives, cheese, and honey laid out. A lyre's strings were plucked softly, perhaps a flute joining in, the music mingling with the fountain sound. Guests reclined, speaking slowly, savoring not only food but the sweetness of air and fragrance. Lamps flickered upon marble statues, casting shadows that seemed alive. Laurel garlands were worn, wine diluted with water poured carefully. It was not indulgence alone, but refinement, feasting within beauty, dining as philosophy. The garden in twilight. As twilight deepened, the last birds returned to nests, the cicada softened, and the stars emerged above the colonnade. The fountain glimmered faintly in the lantern glow. Perfumes thickened, the sharpness of rosemary, the sweetness of roses, the deep greenness of myrtle. Conversation slowed, music drifted into silence. Guests gazed upward at the constellations, the garden framing the heavens themselves. To end a day in the Hortus was to end in harmony, nature, art, devotion, and leisure woven into one gentle embrace. Healing in the garden. Romans believed that plants held both natural and divine power. Within the villa's hortus, remedies were grown side by side with blossoms of leisure. A mother might gather mint to calm a child's stomach, steeping its leaves in warm water. A matron might crush lavender to ease the tension of sleepless nights. Laurel leaves were burned to cleanse the air, rosemary carried in pouches for strength, sage brewed for the body's warmth. Healers sometimes walked through gardens as though through open apothecaries, touching leaves gently, speaking their virtues aloud. The garden was not separate from medicine, it was medicine itself, alive, fragrant, and ready to serve. Even the act of walking among blossoms was considered healing. To breathe their fragrance, to sit beside a fountain, to listen to cicadas, these were remedies for the spirit. The garden healed not only bodies but hearts. Children's games. Amid sacred rituals and philosophical walks, children gave the garden its laughter. They played chasing games along mosaic paths, pretending to be hunters and heroes. They wove daisy chains into crowns, imagining themselves gods and goddesses. Pebbles became dice, twigs became swords, blossoms became prizes. Sometimes they played garden festivals imitating their elders, placing petals on statues, chanting little prayers, pouring water as though offering wine. In play, they absorbed the traditions of Rome, weaving devotion into joy. The garden, for them, was a world of myth, stage, and school. Its corners held their secrets, its shade their laughter, its soil their first lessons of life. Weddings in the Hortus. The Roman garden often bore witness to weddings, intimate and sacred. The bride was crowned with flowers, myrtle, symbol of Venus, woven into her hair. Laurel was placed upon doorways, olive branches hung in garlands. Beneath the pergola, vows were spoken, hands clasped, prayers whispered to gods of love and family. Guests gathered in the colonnade, feasting upon fruit and bread, wine poured generously. Music filled the air, garlands hung from statues, and the fountain song accompanied the joining of lives. The Hortus became temple and banquet hall in one, its blossoms blessing the union, its air breathing sacred joy. The symbolism of fruit trees. Among all plants, fruit trees carried special meaning. The fig tree spoke of fertility and Rome's origins, its shade linked to the founding tale of Romulus and Remus. The olive tree symbolized endurance and peace, its oil blessing both table and altar. The apple tree bore fruit of beauty, gift of Venus, offered in weddings a symbol of love. The pomegranate burst with seeds, image of abundance, fertility, and eternal life. The pear represented sweetness, the delight of the humble meal, the joy of harvests shared. Every fruit was more than nourishment. It was a symbol, a story, a silent ritual growing in branches. The garden at dawn. While evening carried stillness, dawn carried awakening. As the first light spread across the colonnade, the fountain gleamed with golden ripples. Birds sang brightly, the cicadas not yet risen, and blossoms opened slowly to the day. Servants moved quietly, sweeping paths, gathering herbs, refreshing altars. Children stirred from sleep, some running barefoot into the garden to greet the morning. The air was cool, fragrant with dew and mint. Statues glowed softly, not yet caught in the harsh sun. The Hortus, in dawn's light, felt renewed, as though every day were a fresh beginning. To walk here at sunrise was to feel peace reborn. The garden breathed with the rhythm of the world, always ancient, always new. The eternal witness. Through rituals and play, through weddings and dawn walks, the garden remained eternal witness. It watched families grow, generations pass, seasons turn. Its trees remembered more than any scroll, its fountains sang longer than any voice. It was Rome in miniature, alive with order, devotion, and beauty. To live with a garden was to live with memory, with healing, with sacred rhythm. It was to walk daily in a temple, one built not of stone only, but of leaf, water, and sky. Flowers for the departed. Not all blossoms in Rome were for weddings and feasts. Many were carried to graves. On days of remembrance, families entered their gardens to gather violets, roses, and lilies. These were woven into garlands, placed upon tombs, or scattered over the resting places of ancestors. The act was tender, solemn, yet gentle. The fragrance of roses mixed with incense smoke, the petals brightened the stone. The garden's beauty was shared with the dead, carrying love across silence. Thus the Hortus was linked not only to daily joy but also to eternal memory. It held the living and the departed together, its blossoms bridging both worlds. Gardens and philosophy schools. Some Roman philosophers held their lessons beneath trees, within colonnaded courtyards, or in peristyle gardens. Imagine a circle of students seated on benches, a teacher walking slowly among laurel and myrtle, speaking softly of virtue, time, and the soul. The sound of water accompanied his words, the breeze carried them like whispers. The garden was itself philosophy, its cycles a lesson, its silence a companion, its order a reflection of reason. Students wrote upon wax tablets, their thoughts mingling with scents of rosemary and fig. To learn in such a place was to live the teaching, not merely to hear it. Palatial gardens of emperors. If the villa gardens of senators were vast, the gardens of emperors were boundless. In Rome itself, the imperial palaces on the Palatine Hill contained courtyards lined with fountains, terraces planted with exotic trees, and sculptures in shining marble. Water channels glittered like rivers, pathways stretched wide enough for processions. Some emperors imported plants from distant provinces, cedars from Lebanon, spices from the east, rare flowers from Egypt. Their gardens became museums of empire, each leaf and blossom proof of conquest and reach. Yet even in such grandeur, stillness reigned. For the garden, no matter its scale, always whispered calm. The city beyond the walls. Step outside the villa, and the contrast was sharp. The streets of Rome were crowded, noisy, filled with merchants shouting, carts rattling over stones, children calling, dogs barking. The air carried smoke, dust, the mingled scent of food and sweat. But step back within the villa walls, into the Hortus, and all changed. Silence grew. Fragrance replaced dust, fountains replaced clamor, shade replaced heat. The garden was more than retreat, it was another world. Within its walls, life slowed, calmed, softened. To enter was to cross a threshold from chaos to harmony. Stars above the garden. At night, after lamps were dimmed, the garden lifted its gaze to the sky. Columns framed constellations, fountains mirrored stars in trembling light, and statues seemed to point upward with marble hands. Children, lying upon benches, listened as elders told stories of Orion, of Venus shining as evening star, of Jupiter watching from the heavens. The garden thus joined earth to sky. Roots sank into soil, blossoms perfumed the air, fountains sang with water, and above, stars blazed eternal. In this union, Romans felt part of the cosmos. Their garden was not only earth's beauty, but heaven's reflection. A living cosmos. The Hortus was Rome in miniature, but it was also cosmos in miniature. Every tree a world, every fountain a river, every flower a star upon the soil. To walk within it was to walk within creation itself. To care for it was to honor both gods and world. To rest within it was to rest within order, harmony, eternity. Thus, whether in humble courtyard or imperial palace, the garden was always more than leaf and stone. It was a universe, breathing, eternal, sacred. The hands that shaped the garden. Though the garden belonged to the master, its daily life was held by other hands. Slaves and freedmen tended the soil, trimmed vines, cleaned fountains, and cared for blossoms. At dawn they moved silently, sweeping leaves, watering beds, mending broken branches. By midday they shifted pots into shade, carried baskets of herbs, or replaced withered garlands on statues. At night, they trimmed wicks, lit lamps, and ensured that the garden breathed in harmony. These workers knew the hortus more intimately than anyone. They felt its soil under bare hands, heard its whispers in the rustle of leaves, saw its moods in shifting light. Though history seldom names them, they were the garden's soul in action. Music beneath the pergola. Evenings sometimes brought music contests. A young man plucked the lyre, another answered with flute. Guests leaned back upon couches, listening as melodies mingled with the fountain sung. Children clapped to rhythm, servants paused their steps to hear. The garden seemed to vibrate with sound, each note echoing among colonnades. Sometimes poetry joined music. A guest recited verses of love, comparing roses to fleeting youth, or violets to quiet humility. Another answered with tales of gods among blossoms, laughter rising as wine was poured. The hortus was stage and audience, sanctuary and theater. It carried music as naturally as fragrance. Symbols and garden creatures. Not only plants but animals brought meaning into the hortus. The dove represented Venus, goddess of love. To see it nesting in ivy was to feel blessings of affection. The peacock, with feathers like painted stars, symbolized immortality and divine vision. The sparrow carried playfulness and freedom, fluttering among branches. The snake, often hidden near roots, was both feared and honored, guardian of soil, symbol of rebirth. Romans did not see animals as decoration alone. Each was a living sign, a symbol breathing meaning into the garden's air. Storytelling among blossoms. As twilight deepened, families often told stories in the garden. Children gathered on benches, eyes wide as elders recounted myths of Apollo chasing Daphne, of Venus rising from the sea, of Hercules resting in shade. Each plant, each statue, was a doorway to myth. Laurel leaves recalled transformation, roses whispered of love and blood, olives spoke of divine gifts. The garden itself seemed to listen, its leaves rustling in agreement, its fountain adding rhythm to words. Stories did not belong only to scrolls, they lived in courtyards, passed by voice, mingled with fragrance. The soul of the garden. Romans often spoke of the genius loci, the spirit of place. Every garden had its own. Some were lively, filled with laughter, music, and constant feasts. Others were solemn, quiet, touched with shadows and whispers. The genius loci was honored with offerings, wine poured at roots, incense burned near fountains, garlands placed upon altars. The belief was that the garden itself lived, not only its plants and water, but its very presence, its soul. To care for the hortus was to honor that soul. To neglect it was to anger it. Harmony came from devotion, and devotion kept the garden alive. Midnight quiet. At midnight, all was still. The fountain's murmur slowed, the air cooled, the moon cast pale light across stone paths. Statues seemed half alive, silvered with shadow. Perhaps a single servant, carrying a lamp, walked the paths one last time, checking flame, adjusting jar, whispering a prayer. Then silence returned. The garden held its breath, resting, watching, waiting. Its soul alive, its presence eternal. Healing waters and ritual baths. In many Roman villas, the garden was not separate from bathing. Small pools or basins were set within courtyards, where herbs and flowers were added to water. Rose petals floated on the surface, laurel leaves were scattered for protection, rosemary infused its fragrance. To bathe here was to cleanse body and spirit alike. Sometimes rituals were performed, incense burned on nearby altars, chants murmured as water trickled. A sick family member might be bathed in lavender-scented water, prayers whispered to Hygeia and Solace, goddesses of health. The garden thus merged with healing, its fountains becoming sacred channels of renewal. Soldiers in the hortus. When soldiers returned from campaigns, weary and scarred, the garden became sanctuary. They sat beneath olive trees, remembering far-off lands. They touched laurel branches, recalling triumphs but also losses. They walked slowly, hearing fountains, their minds softening from the clash of swords. Often they told stories to children, of deserts crossed, mountains climbed, seas sailed. The garden heard these tales as it had heard myths, blending memory of war with calm of peace. For many, the hortus was the only place where the echoes of battle could fade into rustling leaves. Seasonal feasting. The rhythm of the year shaped not only blossoms but meals. In spring, tables were set with tender greens, peas, herbs freshly gathered. In summer, figs and cherries, cool cucumbers, olives glistening with oil. In autumn, grapes in abundance, pomegranates heavy with seeds, nuts cracked upon marble. In winter, dried fruits, stored olives, and honeyed cakes were enjoyed beneath evergreen garlands. These feasts took place in gardens as often as in halls, shaded by vines, accompanied by fountains. To eat beneath branches heavy with fruit was to taste life's cycle directly, each bite a sacred offering. The role of shadows. Afternoons in the garden were marked not by silence alone but by shadows. Columns stretched long across mosaics, trees